Afternoon or good morning where you all happen to be. Peter Greenberg here from CBS News, and with our special guest, Paul Griffiths, the CEO of Dubai Airports. If we take a look at the overall scheme of importance economically, politically, in terms of flow of traffic, the Dubai Airport is certainly one of the most dynamic, if not one of the busiest airports in the world. And like many airports during COVID-19, suffered a severe drop in traffic. But when I say a severe drop in traffic, the numbers here are staggering. You went, Paul, from 1,100 flights a day with 280,000 passengers a day down to 11 flights a day, maybe even 17 some days. That number dropping is not just one-dimensional in terms of retail, in terms of jobs. It's just not a question of the people coming to the airport. It's a question of the economic issues there and the connectivity issues there. So we know those numbers, and you live them. How did you adapt? Because you didn't really have much of a choice.
You're absolutely right, Peter. It was quite a cataclysmic event, obviously. Our passenger numbers actually dropped by 70%. And that's the outturn for 2020 that we're looking at. And of course, for the largest airport in the world, with the largest number of intercontinental destinations connected to our hub, for the fortunes of Dubai airports, read the fortunes of our airlines, and of course, read the fortunes of the entire economy of Dubai. However, when the pandemic hit, as you correctly said, we went from 1,100 flights to 17. And the situation, of course, requires some fairly drastic measures. So we immediately took steps to greatly reduce our expenditure. We mothballed a large amount of our facilities. We closed one terminal and two concourses, and we operated the remaining two terminals and concourses at greatly reduced capacity. We've turned off air conditioning units. We've slowed down our maintenance program. We've closed one of our two runways. And we've actually reduced our total expenses by 32%, which has meant that we've been able to maintain our liquidity. And now we're seeing actually the aviation industry in Dubai start to get back on its feet, led obviously by our host airlines, Emirates and Fly Dubai. Emirates are now operating, I think, close to 100 destinations and have got 90% of its 777 fleet back in the air. So obviously we're supporting that recovery. And I think this is all about gaining a market presence to be back where we need to be, which is the world's largest intercontinental airport.
Well, let's talk about that in terms of connectivity, because you can't look at it one-dimensionally or in a vacuum. When we're talking about the airport in Dubai, we're talking about the globe, because an overwhelming majority of the passengers coming to Dubai are actually coming through Dubai. So when you essentially drop down to 17 flights a day, you're shutting down the world as well.
Well, we are. That's very true. And of course, we've got an additional complication we have to deal with now, and that is the variable testing and quarantine requirements of all the different countries in the globe. And one of the big problems we've got, which is hampering the recovery, is a lack of an agreed international protocol to make this happen smoothly and effectively. And that's doing nothing to instill confidence in our travelers to return to the air. One of the problems, of course, with a transfer hub is that you're not dealing with protocols between two countries. You're actually dealing with protocols between three countries. And if we've got to check and test passengers that arrive from one country before they connect onto another flight to another country, then that clearly adds time and complication to the journey. So the recovery has been very much led by the attractiveness of Dubai as a holiday destination through the winter. And of course, our weather here through the next few months is absolutely fantastic. So I urge anyone considering a winter sun break, come out here and enjoy the pleasures of Dubai.
Well, beware the law of unintended consequences. You're now a destination.
We are indeed. In fact, we've gone, as you correctly say, from a 50-50 split between a connecting hub and a point-to-point airport to a 75% point-to-point incoming, mostly incoming destination. So that's been quite a shift, but we've actually been very, very quick indeed to adapt to that change in circumstance very well.
One of the questions that keeps coming up, and we had it on the news yesterday, of course, very big news, about the announcement from Pfizer of a vaccine. But in the absence of a vaccine, the real short-term solution has always been the actual availability and implementation of widespread, reliable, fast response testing. And in that area, you guys were one of the first airports that announced that you were going to be doing that.
Absolutely. And we've now got 52 countries that can actually have a COVID test on arrival, which we apply. We've got testing stations which make that a very smooth and quick effort. And as you say, we were one of the first countries to introduce that. What it really needs is for that initiative to be reciprocated around the world. And we're currently trying to negotiate with many countries a reciprocal travel bubble to make the standards we're operating in Dubai common. And one other thing the Dubai government has done over here is been extremely effective in controlling the spread of infection, minimizing the number of people hospitalized, and actually dealing with the outbreak extremely well. So actually the UAE has one of the lowest rates of infection of anywhere in the world. And what I think the world needs to look at is a shift from risk avoidance, which is being practiced in a lot of countries, which actually is one of the most impractical things to try and achieve. I would also suggest possibly impossible, to a sensible risk management strategy where quarantine is done perhaps before travel rather than at the destination, and perhaps there should be multiple points of testing to eliminate what is actually the biggest deterrent for travel, and that is quarantine at the point of destination, which is actually turning off over 80% of prospective travelers because people can't afford the time, the expense, and the inconvenience of an extended quarantine in their destination. If their trip is just say 2 or 3 days, for example, to the UK, that cannot be extended by a further 14 in quarantine in most cases. So that really has to change.
Of course, in addition to testing, you had to do a radical transformation of your floor plan at the airport, your physical design.
Absolutely. We had to do some quite intensive measures to ensure that people are correctly distanced. And of course, we didn't put it to chance to suggest that people could manage that without supervision. So we've got a lot of people throughout the airport maintaining those physical distances between customers. We put by now the ubiquitous plexiglass screens everywhere to safeguard all of our staff. We've introduced a self-service check-in facility into Terminal 3, which has had some very significant uptake because of its largely touchless approach. And we've streamlined the boarding process, we've modified our gates, and we've limited the number of passengers in a lot of areas. So I think the travel industry, particularly in Dubai, certainly the airports and airlines, have worked very, very hard together to make absolutely sure that the passenger journey is as clean and as safe as it possibly can be. I'd even go as far as to say, Peter, that you're probably more at risk from catching COVID-19 in many other environments outside of the travel sector.
You know, I've been one of those people lucky enough because of what I do to be traveling throughout this period. And I can tell you that when I go to different airports, this is the elephant in the room in terms of retail, they're ghost towns. The retail is closed, the parking garages are closed. In many cases, they don't even charge you for parking because it's costing them more to employ the people to charge you for parking than the actual number of cars in the lot. So let's talk about, we're talking about investments today. Airport retail has taken a huge hit globally. And of course, what defines the Dubai airport? My favorite duty-free store in the world. I mean, and the largest, I might add. So what impact has it had on sales there? And in the world of social distancing, how do you operate retail anywhere?
Well, if you can imagine, if we've gone down from over 8 million passengers a month to a little over 1 million a month, that's had a correspondingly significant impact on our retail sales. But I think actually there's probably a more sinister long-term impact here. And that's one thing over lockdown, which more than half the world's population, more than 4 billion people, have been in some form of lockdown over the last 6 to 9 months. And I think the thing is, one thing we've got used to, as we are right now, is different forms of communication and different forms of consumer behavior. And so the online retailers have done absolutely fantastic business over the last few months. And I believe actually this is going to precipitate a wholesale change in the travel retail business. And in fact, this is where I think airlines and airports need to work far more closely together to think of a new model. And I've always said, on average, people have about 24 minutes to consider a duty-free purchase on the ground at an airport. Why can't we team up with the airlines to say, let's use perhaps that 8 to 10 hour flight before people arrive actually at the airport to select from a digital catalogue, and then they collect their purchases on arrival? That would be far more effective and efficient, and we would share the revenue with our airline partners. So the slogan almost needs to be, you provide us with the customers and you can land for free. And I'm throwing that gauntlet down to any of our airline customers to see if they'll take us up on embarking in a new direction for travel retail, because I think we will have to, because consumer behavior has, in that respect, I think, changed forever.
And if you're correct on that, then the real estate that you have available for retail at the airport will be redefined as well.
Absolutely. And I think that people in the future will look for more services. Perhaps we'll see a difference in the way that connections are made. Perhaps people will spend longer. Perhaps we can have business centers, relaxation rooms. We've already got spas and swimming pools. Perhaps we should have cinemas, bowling alleys, all of these ideas. I'm not going to mention any more just in case any of my competitors are online with us today. But I think this is a time for innovation, because consumer behavior will change. There'll be huge social change, maybe huge economic change in travel for many years to come. And those who innovate and act quickly will be at the forefront of being able to exploit the opportunity that such changes will produce.
Well, speaking of real estate and innovation and infrastructure, there's the medical component. It's one thing to be first on your block with a comprehensive testing program, but you also have to build into the design, you have to bake it in to provide a facility in case somebody tests positive, correct?
That's absolutely right. And I think already we've got a number of different hotels. We've got one hotel in one of our concourses and 2 hotels in another. And those hotels actually, with a third and fourth being reopened shortly, we will have enough space for people, if they do test positive, to be able to safely quarantine with all the services and benefits provided them in a safe environment until they're cleared to fly again. So I think the message coming out of Dubai is, if you want to come and visit us, enjoy the hospitality and the wonderful weather, we'll take care of you while you're here.
What's the overriding lesson that you've learned that you've been able to apply, since you weren't really planning for any of this? Nobody was.
No, absolutely. Well, I think the first thing is, in the aviation business, it's always expect the unexpected, because of course you can be running a business which is growing nicely and then something like this comes along and hits you. I think one of the things is do not be tempted in good times to overinvest in marginal activity. And one of the things whilst we were growing is I was quite insistent that we employ a significant number of strategic partnerships with other companies to bring products, services, and other products to us, to be able to be flexible in our approach. And that's paid huge dividends. We started the I can give you a great example. We started the pandemic with 8,400 employees, part of those outsourced, part of those insourced. Within a month of the pandemic breaking down, we were able to reduce that number to just something like 3,000. And we're continuing to look at the prospects of being able to reduce our costs further and move from fixed infrastructure costs to variable infrastructure costs. And that, I think, is incredibly important in a business that needs to be flexible, not just because of the chances of a further pandemic, hopefully, when we get through the current situation, but also in business. I think particularly in the travel and tourism industry, the cycles of development are going to shorten. They are in most industries. And we've got to really be very fleet of foot and adapt to very, very significant change in customer need in the future. And those that can successfully predict and get it right will be the ones that will be successful.
Well, from a financial investment point of view, and necessity being the mother of invention, or in this case, perhaps the mother of efficiency, what did you do before that you've now made the decision we will never do again?
Well, one of the things I think is that infrastructure is becoming incredibly costly to create. And obviously, in many parts of the world, the environmental impacts of building more airport capacity are going to become even more difficult to overcome. I mean, I think we've all been struck by the satellite images of China during the lockdown at how the pollution just vanished from the atmosphere. And we've seen those pictures of kangaroos hopping through the streets of Sydney and mountain goats in the seaside towns in Wales. Those, I think, have made us much more aware about the need to safeguard the environmental impact that travel and tourism provides. And we're working with a number of suppliers now to dramatically change the environmental impact. And I think one thing is airport infrastructure needs to be used far more effectively and efficiently, because I think that's a huge benefit to using the infrastructure better and not building more infrastructure. We've now realized that with a lot of technical investment and improvement, we can get DXB from its current capacity of about 100 million up to 120 million with just 2 runways, thanks to the efficiency of our host airlines and their large aircraft, and also the fact that we have spent the last 10 years getting every single last drop of capacity out of our existing infrastructure. So I think we run an extremely efficient 24/7 operation, but I think the secret in the future is use the infrastructure and the technology that we've got to make our existing investments more effective, rather than constantly building new structures, which is far less effective in terms of use of capital.
So before you were building for growth, now you're trying to build, if anything, just for common sense.
Well, in effect, we were doing both before the COVID-19 situation hit, because when I arrived in Dubai some 13 years ago, we were at 32 million, and the supposed capacity of DXB was about double that at 65 million. In 2018, we got to 91 million, and still with great customer service. And we believe that over the next few years, we will get another 30 million through the airport. So I think investing in efficiency, and I suppose being British, I have a long history of make, do and mend rather than investment. So my background, I think, has led us in that direction. And I think we've avoided a huge amount of investment that perhaps we wouldn't now be able to recoup the return on for many years to come.
You know, we talk about the old playbook has to be thrown out because, you know, there's no secondary market now for airplanes. There's no secondary market for cruise ships. There's no secondary, you know, they're being parked or they're being scrapped. So when you're dealing with the economy of scale here, you have the ability with the world's largest fleet of, let's say, A380s, to make sure that you can, you know, be more efficient if you're flying fewer planes with larger numbers of people on the planes. But then there's the other aspect of when are we going to get to the point from a carbon footprint point of view and biofuels to make that scalable as well when we're living in a world where things are being reduced.
Well, I think actually, Peter, you have to do all of those things at the same time. And I think we're in a very unique situation because of the concentration of capacity we've got at DXB. We are in the very fortunate position of being the only combination of airport and airline that can make the A380 work through DXB. We can certainly amass with the 260 cities that is in our network from DXB. We can certainly amass the volume necessary to make the A380 network work. And I think Emirates has already got, as I said earlier, 90% of its 777s back in the sky now. So we're optimistic that uniquely that is not a problem. We will make it work again. As regards sustainability and the commercial aspects, clearly, as you rightly say, it does mean that we have to also have the lowest cost per seat mile of any airline airport combination in the world. And we're going to work very hard with Emirates and our other airline partners to make sure that's the case. The other thing about sustainability, one of the things that I'm very involved in is, as you mentioned, biofuel and sustainable aviation fuel. And I'm very optimistic that the feedstock to be able to produce sustainable aviation fuel in quantity does actually exist. And we are talking to several of the fuel companies at the moment about putting sustainable aviation fuel into volume production, and a mechanism through which we can actually gradually introduce blended sustainable aviation fuel into the fuel supply, because pretty much every aeroplane flying today is now certified to use a blend of sustainable aviation fuel up to 50% blended with traditional Jet A1. And we've come up with a pricing mechanism to make the actual cost of introducing that palatable for both airlines and customers. And the good thing is that could be a very, very fast route to be able to drastically reduce the carbon footprint of aviation, and for us to turn from the pariah of the environment into a great supporter of the environment. I'm confident we could get to below the normal CO2 emissions per mile of a family car in very short order.
But that, of course, presumes you're going to get the price down, because right now we know biofuel works. It's been tested, it's been proven. That's why the airplanes have been certified for it. But the price is nowhere near where it needs to be able to be financially viable.
That's absolutely right. But I am sure that if we start with a small percentage blend, and then we really push the fuel companies to step up and produce biofuels in volume, the economies of scale that should result from that should bring the cost of biofuel down. And I think as the blend increases, hopefully the cost will come down. But I think what should happen is we should be paying a blended fuel price for a blend of Jet A1, where the Jet A1 price is increased across the board to take account of the fact that we're having to blend it with more expensive but sustainable fuel. The actual costs per ton of reduced CO2 that the industry would then produce are actually in line with a lot of other environmental practices. So I think when we've worked this through with the fuel companies and come up with a formula, it's a very quick way of getting the ecological footprint into a more sustainable footing.
Paul Griffiths, the CEO of Dubai Airports. Always a pleasure to see you. I'll see you in duty free. I will. And I hope
I'll meet you there, Peter. I will meet you there. Look forward to that time very much indeed. Thanks so much for today.
Thank you, everybody. And we'll throw it back.